Hi guys, AJ here. Welcome back to Evaluating Legal Risk, and we're up to the readings for week 3, just covering some key concepts once again. This week we're really looking at responsive regulation and regulatory theory, and I guess the preeminent work that we need to be engaging with this week is John Braithwaite's work. However, before you jump into Braithwaite's work, because it can be a little bit more complex, it's a really good idea to have a look at Valerie Braithwaite's primer, the 10 Things article. She goes through the to-do list for the reasonable responsive regulator. And it's a really good article to kind of start wading into regulatory theory, because it covers kind of the softer aspects of regulatory theory. So she does touch on the concept of John Braithwaite's responsive regulatory model, which is the pyramid model, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. However, she kind of glosses over that almost with just a very general treatment, and then she moves kind of straight into talking about the things that the responsive regulator should have foremost in their mind when they're creating regulation in any particular area. The area that she's talking about in this particular article is tax law. However, as she notes, it's perfectly generalizable across any different area of regulatory activity that you might wish to engage with. So on her to-do lists, she says that people view a regulatory authority as a potential threat to freedom and well-being, and that this threat exists for both those who break the law and those who don't break the law. And she goes through the most common approach to that threat, which is taken by taxpayers in this particular example, and most of us, it looks like more than 90%, will actually try and do the right thing and adopt the role of honest and law-abiding citizen in terms of their tax activities. But she says, look, there are other responses out there. There are those that wish to cheat. There are those that do the wrong thing by ignorance. And so what you need to do as a regulator is realise that there are lots of different, she calls them selves, out there in the regulatory arena that you need to cater for, and you need to make it as easy as possible for those various different selves to put forward that honest and reasonable citizen so that compliance will be achieved. So that's the first to-do point. The second to-do point is knowing your regulatory objective. Do you want to punish? Do you want to elicit compliance by some form of carrot? And here she's prefaced this discussion with the pyramid structure by saying most of the regulatory activity should occur with a relatively light touch. So that's the base of the pyramid. Most of the activity is occurring here, and most of the activity is the carrot rather than the stick. And then once non-compliance becomes more entrenched and more willful, you move up that regulatory pyramid to increasingly intrusive forms of sanction. So she's saying, know the regulatory pyramid and know what you're setting out to achieve to start with. So is it that you need to have a certain tool bag of punishments up the top, or are you going to be much more concerned with setting out a range of objectives down the bottom to elicit compliance in a more incentive-based fashion? So she's saying you've got to design your regulatory intervention with both of these ends of the spectrum in mind, and usually both of those ends of the spectrum will be part of your pyramid. Then she looks at be open to cases of hardship. So you need to introduce some form of flexibility in terms of accommodating people that are adversely impacted by your regulatory interventions. You need to have one eye, this is item number 4, on procedural fairness, procedural justice, and also you need to engage with dissenting voices. And points 5 and I think 6 and 7 are all based around the notion of dissent. How exactly do you listen to those dissenting voices? What kinds of dissent will you take into account? What kinds will you not take into account? Do you engage with dissent on moral grounds? And here she goes into, well, really the authority of regulators is premised on the fact of moral authority, and the regulatees' attitudes to the authority are very heavily influenced on their perceptions of morality. So have a look at item 7 for the discussion there. So item number 8 is providing hope for the future through recognising and praising strengths openly. And this is all part of the the carrot and stick approach, I guess, that they take with the responsive regulatory pyramid. Item number 9, return to the scene of non-compliance and re-engage with regulatory intervention. And she's saying here, you really need to avoid the whole mindset of becoming fixed in your responses to non-compliance. Don't always go straight for the harsher punishment. Start from the bottom of the pyramid and then work your way up as that non-compliance becomes more entrenched, more willful. Okay, so, and lucky last, item number 10, direct energy to building networks within the regulatory community to gain a broad-based capacity for eliciting compliance. And here she talks about all of the myriad networks that they have, for example, in their taxation discussion. So they've got, things like tax agents, accountants, lawyers in private practice, courts, judges, experts, all of that kind of thing. She's saying get everyone on board, get everyone discussing the regulation, get everyone invested in the regulation, and then you'll have a good sense of being able to work collaboratively. You'll get better buy-in, better opt-in for your regulatory measures, and you'll have knowledge sharing, and you'll have a good feedback mechanism for how your regulatory intervention is operating. So have a little look at Valerie Braithwaite. She's a really good intro to the whole area of responsive regulatory theory. Okay, so looking at John Braithwaite's article that I want you to read this week. I don't want to say too much about it because we're going to talk about it in the Zoom session, I would imagine, in reasonable detail, and you can discuss any issues or queries that you have then. But there's a couple of things that I want you to note. Firstly is his discussion of the responsive regulatory pyramid. It's a really useful tool that gives you an idea how to structure regulatory interventions. So moving from the least intrusive to the more intrusive. And Braithwaite gives you a really good idea as to why you need that pyramid structure, why you need most activity being relatively light touch and moving up to fairly sparing use of intrusive sanctions. That kind of thing is useful for you to have in mind when you're talking about addressing your legal risk problem and how you go about developing your framework of solutions to the problem that you've identified. You don't necessarily want to jump straight into an intrusive sanction right at the top of the pyramid. You want to work from the bottom up. So the responsive regulatory pyramid is a really good idea to have in the back of your mind when you're thinking about your legal risk problem and how you're going to answer the problem. The second thing I want you to note is just how similar Braithwaite's discussion of these 9 essential points is to the kind of things that we've been looking at last week in terms of systems thinking and systems building, and also de-thinking from the Hasso-Plattner Institute. So again, where systems thinking and de-thinking would say, well, first of all, you've got to look at context. Once again here, the first principle we see from Braithwaite is have a little look at your context. Make sure that you've listened to your stakeholders. Again, harking back to systems thinking, de-thinking. The third point really has more of a regulatory flavour, more of a top-down flavour. So think about issues of fairness and how exactly you're going to design your regulatory interventions to achieve compliance. 4 is about, obviously, the carrot rather than the stick. 5, signalling that you prefer to achieve your compliance by support and education. That's the bottom base of the pyramid. But point 6, making it clear that you can and will move up that intrusive scale of the pyramid as non-compliance becomes more entrenched and more willful. Again, networking, it harks back to systems, it harks back to finding out what makes each of the pieces of the context, the regulatory arena, tick. What makes them interact the way that they do? Have a look at the larger framework of your regulatory intervention and engage wider networks of partners. Active responsibility is elicited by starting at the bottom and moving up to the top. And obviously, number 9, have a look at how things work in practice. Do they actually work as you intended? Assess and evaluate the effectiveness of what you've done, and if it needs to be tweaked, then go ahead and tweak it. Again, harking back to systems thinking, de-thinking kinds of processes. So all of these kinds of points should be ticking over at the back of your mind as you're thinking about your legal risk evaluation problem that you want to resolve with your project for this term. And if you have any queries in relation to responsive regulation or systems thinking, de-thinking, then certainly raise them in the Zoom sessions with me. So hopefully by now, week 3, by looking at Susskind week 1, having the grand, bird's eye view of things, looking at systems thinking and de-thinking in terms of the more active processes that you're going to engage when you're analysing your legal risk problem, and now overlaying all of that with the regulatory side of things, it all starts to cumulatively build up a picture of the kinds of tools that you should have in your analysis toolkit when you are going about doing your project plan and when you're going about writing up your project. Drawing on all of these various different elements, because they all do build in quite nice, different but complementary ways, I think will set you up to do a really nice and well-reasoned and professional project at the end of term. So if you have any queries, have any questions, talk with me in the Zooms. Other than that, I'll catch you later. And if you liked this video, give it a big thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks guys, see ya.